and so to me, an ethic represents sort of like a compass that guides behavior, right?
Hello,
Let's
today I'm here with Dr. Armato, and we are going to be discussing his views on ethics. My first question is, across disciplines, ethics means different things to different scholars. What does ethics mean to you?
Okay. Well, for me, I think of ethics as, I'm in the Department of Sociology, right? So we don't talk about, I mean, we do talk about ethics sometimes, but not like philosophers do. Like they spend, I think, whole, eternities discussing ethics and all this kind of stuff. Um, but for me, when I think of ethics, I think of both collectively held and individually held ideas of what's right and wrong. So to me, an ethic represents sort of like a compass that guides behavior, right? That guides decision making, guides thought, guides behavior. And of course, different people's ethics can, or different group ethics can contradict each other. Different institutions can have different ethics. But I think of it generally in terms of a set of principles, guiding principles that um, help us make sense of the world, help us like understand how to see the world, and then help guide our actions. That's what I would say.
What pushed you to study gender through an intersectional lens?
I will start by saying that my initial, what got me to go to graduate school. I'm a first generation college student, right? No one in my family had finished a 4-year college, much less, going to graduate school or anything like that. And so what got me to decide to go back to graduate school was that I was sort of stricken by the degree to which like gender organized the world, and in particular, like I was uncomfortable with the way sexism would play out in the world, and also the ways that I saw racism playing out. And I didn't use that language to define it, but that was kind of what was happening in my life. I was like, okay, this seems weird, it makes me uncomfortable. Proved as sort of the impetus for me to start asking questions. I had a roommate at the time, and I was talking to him about this, and he was like, I think that's sociology. And so I literally went to UCF's library. I wasn't a student anymore, and I just typed sociology in the computer, doing a search for on the books. And the first book I pulled off the shelf had a chapter on gender and a chapter on race, and I don't remember which order they were in, but and then it was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is what I want to do. And so I then kind of did some research and decided to apply to graduate schools, not because I had a career goal in mind, just because I wanted to think about this stuff more. And I just felt like the folks who were making the most sense, that is to say, those who were explaining the world in the most full and complete way to me were they were using an intersectional perspective. And what that means is they were kind of not just talking about gender, but thinking about the ways that gender and race and class, sexuality, age, nation of origin, citizenship status, how all these dimensions of social life, how that organized the way the world is ordered. And that just brought me to an intersectional perspective. But I really just, I mean, what leads me to do it is just that I think it's the most accurate portrayal of what's happening in the world. I mean, that's the simple answer. It's like this best captures what's happening. So that's it. But I do have a passion for understanding it in a way that I do think is about ethics, if I can say that. I mean, I just think there's a way that what prompted my interest in studying gender and race was this feeling of discomfort that it felt like stuff that was happening, that I was seeing in the world, like interpersonally in the world, but also just out there in the news, just felt like wrong. Like this shouldn't be happening. Like this doesn't seem like correct behavior, right? Like it felt icky to me. And so, but I think it was because I subscribed to a particular set of like ethical principles. Like I was like, oh, this doesn't seem right.
Could you expand on that a little bit and talk about the connections of ethics to your work and then maybe more like how it affected you personally? Because it seems like a lot of it came from like how you like changed your views or had your views and it made you like study a certain part of it. And
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it seems like it's a very personal topic, like studying that. And I'm just
Yeah.
curious if it changed your ethics at all while working on it, because it does have like a lot
Yeah.
of views that might be different for different people. So did it have a big effect on you?
Yeah, I think when I look back and think about, I kind of said, oh, it was after I graduated college and I was thinking about it and talked to a friend. But I think I had some misgivings that stuff just didn't seem correct, like even back in high school, right? So there was like sexuality was playing out, right? And there was like a power differential where quite popular older boys were seemingly trying to influence these younger girls in specific ways, right? And again, I didn't know much different, so it wasn't like I was totally outside of these practices, but there was a way that I don't know, I just saw like girls that I knew who were vibrant, middle schoolers when they were in eighth grade, got to high school, and within a couple of years, they were still vibrant in certain ways, but something had changed, and I felt like part of their light had gone out or something, right? Or they had been compelled to kind of shrink themselves or transform themselves into particular directions that were different from what I knew then. And again, I think I'm more articulate now about it than what was happening. But then I just saw it, and I was thinking about it, and it felt odd to me. There was something felt wrong to me. But even that again is sort of much more well developed than how I experienced it. I was just sort of like I kind of just observed it and was like I couldn't imagine it being otherwise. But it was just like, oh, that's it. And so that kind of like it kind of feels funky, like I said, kind of stayed with me as I kind of kept my inquiry. And so, the thing like treat others as you want to be treated, I just kind of felt like there was a lot of that not happening in the world. And I kind of felt like that seems pretty simple. How come these things are happening, right? And so as I began to study, as a graduate student in particular, right, I sort of learn language and people kind of helped me understand stuff. And as I understood more, I felt like, in some ways, I felt like, oh, they're actually writing what I'm thinking. But of course, they're writing it much more clearly than I'm thinking it, right? But I'm like, yes, that's it, right? And so I was having that kind of almost like I'm having a dialogue with the people that I'm reading, right, across my coursework. And there was a significant component of that to me seemed about rightness and wrongness. Like a lot of what feminist scholars are doing, what scholars of race are doing, is in some ways saying, if we really claim to be, committed to a general sense of egalitarianism, right, of treating others as you want to be treated individually, but also collectively, then we are falling short. And a lot of the scholarship just basically shows the ways that we're falling short. I mean, honestly, if you study gender, if you study race in my field, but across fields, we find that if we are committed to these ethical principles, we are doing pretty miserably at fulfilling those ethical principles, right? And so I think it's my experience of engaging with, kind of the reading, classroom discussions, with feminism and with feminist ideas. And there I'm thinking also intersectional feminists, right? So they're not just thinking about gender, they're thinking about race and racism and class and sexuality, all these things. And so I just feel like ethics to me, is sort of central to those things. And in terms of my work, understand that most of my job is advising students and teaching as well. Because I'm an associate lecturer, right? So I have a position that basically teaching is my priority. I don't have to do as much research as some other folks on campus. And so I think it's important that we stay committed to our set of ethics in our teaching and in our advising as well, because I think there's plenty of us who might study inequality in gender and race, but then we go into the classroom and we reproduce those inequalities of gender and race while we're teaching. But we don't think we're going to reproduce those because we read the stuff and we're a scholar in this area. But our interactional processes, the way that we structure our course, like produces we are sort of like contradicting our professed ethics through the strategies that we employ when we're teaching, when we're advising, when we're mentoring students. And so I have become far more thoughtful in my teaching, I think, than I always think I was somewhat thoughtful, but I think I've gotten much better at being just way more thoughtful with my students and trying to be, give my students more grace, treat them with more respect and kindness. And so like ethics informs that for me, right? That informs my strategies.
Right. So has ethics then been a large part of your studies?
Yes. One of the things that's happened um, is that to the extent that I've published, it's really been about, reflections upon my experiences in academia in spaces that ostensibly proclaim to be about equality or inclusion, but then engage in practices, processes that produce those very inequities, produce the very exclusions that supposedly we're talking about and challenging, right? So, so that I think it's sort of like a continuation of those experiences that I had mentioned back in high school, where I'd see stuff happening around me in the world and think like, oh, that just doesn't feel right, right? That seems kind of wrong here. What's happening, right? Now I have a much bigger sort of repertoire of concepts or ideas that I can kind of use to understand what's happening. Um, but I do think I'm certain actually. I think ethics shape much of what I end up doing in my daily life, my daily experiences, and more generally in terms of to the extent that I publish, certainly to the extent the stuff that I read, that I focus on, that I integrate into my classroom, so the curriculum that I propose, right? But then also the teaching strategies, the pedagogy that I employ when engaging with students. I mean, all of it is informed. So it's not just my studies. It's sort of like, oh, I see it as there's this term called praxis, right? That sort of takes conceptual ideas that are out there in the world, like theories about things, puts them into practice, and we call that praxis, right? And so I seek to kind of never quarantine research or scholarship from how I engage in the world, right? I want it to inform how I'm doing what I'm doing. Um, and again, that means I think being far more sort of affording my students more grace, affording them more space, treating them like human beings, and and understanding them as whole human beings, right? I mean, not just we're not all brains in a jar, right? I know we're doing an academic enterprise here, but for us to pull it off, I think I think we have to engage with each other as human beings and be humane in doing so. What I think about writing about are things that look at the ways that we value particular types of knowledge, particular types of claims, right? Like whose opinions, whose experiences matter in the world, um, especially in academic contexts, although it's true in political contexts as well, as has become quite clear with things that are happening in Florida and across the United States around what kind of things, kind of concepts or ideas we're allowed to teach, and what kind of things are being increasingly restricted, right? We're being restricted from being, supposedly being able to teach. So I have an interest in general about like whose ideas matter, what kind of knowledge matters, what kind of knowledge counts, and what kind of knowledge gets pushed to the side, excluded, what kind of knowledge gets discounted, right, or gets perfectly erased, right? What kind of knowledge is forbidden, right? Even right. So, and I've had that interest for a while now, and so like seeing what's playing out, in terms of legislative efforts again in Florida and across the United States, is it's intellectually intriguing. It's politically terrifying, but it's intellectually intriguing in the sense that it is sort of the stuff that I'm interested in, right? I've written a bit about how masculinity gets reproduced through academic practices, right? Just the ordinary goings on of academic institutions, academic conferences, which research counts, which is discounted, and so that's kind of as people might say, like, it's like that's my wheelhouse, right? And so that remains on sort of my horizon, and I always keep a folder that's like, oh, ideas, 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 right? And so there are things that I think about writing. I also, I'm continually reminded of the importance of academic community, and I think to loop it into ethics, and I have thought about this quite a bit in the past year, I would say, here in Florida as an academic. All of our fields, I think, are committed to some degree of collectivism, some degree that we are part of an academic community. When I conduct my research, I share it with you, my fellow academic. I don't charge you for it, right? I share it with you. We share our work together. We collectively produce knowledge. And we hold each other to account, right? If our methods fall short, if we make some claims that are a little squirrely, right? We're supposed to hold each other to account. Like, hey, think about this, or you can't do that. And so that idea, right, that kind of collectivist ethic, I think is fundamental. And I believe at the core of that is an ethical concern that too few or perhaps none of our academic leaders, like those that hold the highest office in our academic institutions, are actually standing up against these challenges and defending these collectivist commitments, right? Defending our shared commitment to each other in, you know, the knowledge production process. So, and when I think of ethics, I think of, like, once again, like, the ethics produce in me the sense of, like, this is troubling, right? There's something wrong here. And so I feel like that to me often becomes the source from which, like, intellectual inquiry stems. I feel like, my ethical orientation is always developed. I have some independence, obviously, but my ethical orientations, my ethical commitments really grow out of my relationships with others. And here I think I want to center the experiences of those who are often subordinate to me, right? So my students, right? I think it's really important. I think we need an ethical commitment, honestly, to listen to those who are sort of most affected by what's happening in the world, right? Whether it's the folks in, like, a Black Lives Matter movement who are talking about their experiences with policing and housing and things like that, right? I think I think we should cultivate an ethical commitment to listen to the experiences and voices of those who are sort of the most vulnerable among us. And I think we have an ethical commitment then, after listening, to follow their lead and take action to at least reduce as much as possible harm that does and could come to them, to really make the world a better place, right? And so, that's what I would say. And that sounds like highfalutin coming out of nowhere, but it really is. It does grow out of my experience as a teacher, right? Of being in classrooms with young, disproportionately young people who, I listen to my students now who are living in Florida and trying to stay afloat while rent prices are just astronomical, right? Like, it's like monopoly money how much my students spend on rent, right? And they struggle to get by while they work at a bar or a theme park or a restaurant or something. And so, like, I think we have an ethical commitment to listen to that. And then I think we have an ethical commitment to respond. And that means advocating for policies on campus, but also policies across the state or in our municipality or city or, our counties, whatever, to help those students stay afloat, right? And we know that our students, in fact, are some of the better off people out there. And so those who can't afford to come to college, they're even, their plight is even worse. And so I think we have an ethical commitment to do that. And the source, the source of that knowledge starts with people and listening to others, right? And trying to make a connection and empathize as much as possible.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming today and speaking and answering all my questions. It was very nice to hear from you.
Oh,
And
thanks for having me.